Thanks for tuning into this presentation. You're about to either watch a video or listen to audio recorded at the Grassroots Radio Conference in 2012 at the Independent Media Center in Urbana-Champaign. Please enjoy.
Panelists, introduce ourselves and then we'll introduce you all.
Barbara Kessel, and I work with Books to Prisoners, 3 R's right here in Champaign.
Stephen Renderos, National Organizer at the Center for Media Justice. We are partners in a campaign with Working Narratives and Prison Legal News called the Campaign for Prison Phone Justice. And then we wanted to go around and have everybody introduce yourself. If you could give your name, if you happen to be affiliated with a radio station, which radio station? And if not, what would you call your radio station? And the question we want you to think about is, say one word that describes the criminal justice system. So in one word, how would you describe?
In your community.
In your community, yep. So in one word, how would you describe the criminal justice system in your community? And we'll start to our left here and work our way around.
I'm Byron Brooks from Chicago. I'm a producer with Community Access Network, a television program. I'm concerned about what's happening in the prison system, and my one word is unfair. You stole mine.
My name is Marley Thomas, working with Twin Cities Community Radio in Minneapolis. One word to describe the prison system.
My name is Gary Storm. I'm on the board here at the IMC, and a volunteer for Books to Prisoners. Go around and collect books that other people organize and distribute. I was going to say unfair or unequal, biased.
My name's Tom Clammer. I have a show called Tell Somebody on KKFI Community Radio in Kansas City, www.tellsomebody.us. I'm not involved with it, but we have a relatively new show on the air on KKFI called Jaws of Justice that tries to focus on the system. All kinds of different viewpoints, but they want to include people in the system, you know, whether incarcerated or recently out themselves or their families. And one word, I would have gone with a couple of those: racist, unfair, I don't know, nowadays maybe corporate.
Yeah, you stole my word. I'm from Dayton, Ohio. I work at WYSO, and our prison system in Ohio is getting increasingly privatized and corporatized.
My name is Rodney McBeth. I'm like a student in the area, so I'm not affiliated with any sort of radio station, but in my hometown, I would say unknown, I guess, with our prison system. It's just something not talked about very often. It just kind of goes under the radar.
So it's a name, if you're affiliated with a radio station, what radio station, and then say one word that describes the criminal justice system in your community.
My name is Melena Velez. I produce shows on WPV 88.1 in Philly, but I'm not like affiliated with radio station. And one word, be expanding.
I'm Sarah. I'm from WRT Community Radio in Madison, Wisconsin. My one word would be discrepancy, but to describe that further, we have the highest discrepancy between white and black incarceration in our county in the nation. It's like 21.
What county was it?
Dayton County, Wisconsin, capital city.
My name is Jessica. I'm from Detroit, Michigan. I don't work for a radio station. If I had one, I'm not sure what I would name it. And in Michigan, prisons are one of our biggest economies. So if you're corporate, racist, unfair, expanding, but I think I would call it crippling.
Call it what?
Crippling.
I'm Heather Fisher-Wallen. I'm tagging along with my husband. He works for WDRT in Roper, Wisconsin. And I work in a town where there's a prison. And I would say, well, in one word, hidden. When people leave the prison, they often don't stay in the community where the prison is. But if they do, I think people don't the general people in the community don't understand what goes on, or how to even help when somebody gets out. So I think it's more of a, people don't understand. Yeah.
I'm Becca. I'm from here, well, for now, because I'm in the library science program, and I also volunteer at the jail library for books to prisoners. And I'm doing prison studies with my program, and the word that I think of the most when I'm learning about this is how scary it is. It is hidden in all these other words that you guys have saying.
My name is Josefina Franco, and I'm involved in the KFAI, La Voz del Pueblo. It's in Spanish, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, in St. Paul. And one of the crucial problems there is the racial profile with the Latino community and students of color.
Mm-hmm. So I think we wanted to do just a quick overview of what the criminal justice system looks like, so that we all have a general understanding of what we're talking about today, and then we'll specifically start talking about how we can incorporate or use radio as a tool to help push back against that system. So just to kind of lay it out plainly, there are about 2.2 million people that are incarcerated in the United States. It's the highest rate of incarceration anywhere in the world. We incarcerate more people than any other country. 40% is the number of African Americans, is the percentage of the African Americans in the prison population, and then 20% is the percentage of Latinos. So collectively, people of color, or African Americans and Latinos, make up 60% of the prison population. There are different ways to be incarcerated in the U.S. We have prisons and jails, and the main distinction I'll make between the two is that a prison indicates that you've been convicted of a crime, but jails tend to be populated by folks who are serving short-term sentences, as well as folks who haven't been convicted of any crime. We also have juvenile detention centers, and I think the last statistic from 2007 that I looked at, we had well over 80,000 juveniles that were detained in one given year. I'm sure that number's gone up since then. We also have increasingly, more recently, private detention centers, and I'll talk a little bit later what's really led to the growth in private detention centers, but suffice it to say that there are a lot across the country, and it's particularly used for detaining immigrants in the United States. So just a little infographic, 2.2 million currently incarcerated, 60% people of color. One of the adverse effects of this is the effects on the family. So there are about 2.7 million children in the United States who have one or two parents incarcerated in prison. The other adverse effect of this is that the way that prisons have been constructed in recent years, prisons are located now further and further away from where incarcerated folks are from. So on average, about an adult male is about 100 miles away from their local community, is incarcerated 100 miles away from their local community, and for women that number is about 150 miles away. About 10% of children who have a parent incarcerated in prison, their parent is at least about 500 miles away. So if you think about it, the frequency in visits, in the face-to-face, and even in the communication, it's severely limited. Around private detention centers, we have about 350 private detention facilities all over the U.S. Detains about 400,000 immigrants each year. And the largest of these is a group called Corporations Corrections of America, CCA. And they rake in about $130 million in profit each and every single year. CCA is also very significant in the criminal justice sector for a lot of different reasons, but one of which being they were one of the main proponents of, the SB, SB, is it 1080? 1070. Of those anti-immigrant bills that popped up in Arizona and Alabama, that essentially expanded the rights of local law enforcement to start enforcing immigration laws. They were one of the main proponents behind that because they understood in order to expand their profit margins, they needed to implement the kinds of policies that increase the populations of folks in prison. So we've seen a mass increase in private detention centers across the country. One other thing I'll highlight is around the connection between children and prisons. This infographic comes out of a study in California which took a look at the pipeline between schools to prisons and then also foster care to prisons. The main statistic I'll highlight is at the bottom, which says that 68% of inmates in the California correctional facilities are folks who did not have a high school diploma. Is it visible or? Yeah, okay, cool. The other thing I'd say is that 70% of folks who are inmates in California state prisons were former foster care youth. So there's a very intimate connection that we have going on here between the failure of our education system and then as well as the failure of the foster care system when that's in place. But some of the other statistics there just kind of highlights some of those failures as well. In addition, even if you have gone and did your time, in the United States we have about 7.3 million folks who are attached to the criminal justice system in one way, shape, or form. That means they are either incarcerated, are on parole, are on probation, any number of things. And that number translates to about 1 in 33 people in the US. So this mass increase of folks who are somehow attached to this criminal justice system is really a result of a couple things. One is the war on drugs that was cropped up in the 80s. And then the other has been the war on immigrants, which has been more recent, but has ultimately led to policies and investment of resources towards incarcerating more and more people. And what this really develops for us in the United States is a prison industrial complex in which, especially for communities of color, we are much more profitable for the criminal justice system being incarcerated than we are being free. So that's just a snapshot of what we got going on in the US, and I hope that kind of helps to ground the conversation that we're in.
So we wanted to take a little bit of time to hear from you all about where do you see the prison system intersecting with your community. So we did the kind of one word, but let's take a couple minutes to hear from 3 or 4 people in your community, where is your community intersecting with the justice system or the juvenile justice system or the detention system? Where are you all seeing that?
I feel that prisons do not rehabilitate. And I'm advocating, especially for blacks and browns, since we make up 65 to 85% of the population, that we have a responsibility to reach out to persons in prison, and when they become ex-cons or ex-felons, we develop programs in our communities to rehabilitate, re-educate, and prepare them to return to society so that they can take their rightful places. Once they have done their time, they pay their debts, but society won't accept that. And there's a myth or a con, and I think that black and brown people, especially in my community, have to reach out so that we have these educational programs and we can retrain these ex-felons so that they can take their place in the society as far as fathers, mothers, business persons, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I actually think it goes beyond that. I think that we need to address the system in and of itself, because I think there's something fundamentally wrong with the system where you can go to jail for stealing an iPod and then never get out of the jail system because you get out and then you're on parole, but you can't get a job and you can't go anywhere, so you have to steal some food to eat, and then you're right back in the system. And then so that revolving door within our jail and prison system needs to go, or I don't think we're going to see. I don't think we're going to fix the problem unless we change the system.
I think also, to go off of that, the school to prison pipeline, which was briefly mentioned, that's what I see in my community. You can't think of schools shutting down without thinking of the influx that prisons, especially private prisons, are getting ready for. So that's what I see in Detroit. There were 23 schools shut down last year.
One thing that we've seen in Philly, where I work, there's been so many examples of expansion of immigration detention and different ways that more and more people are being brought into the criminal justice system. But one thing we've also seen is how the fact that folks are really making money off of this, I think is really crucial. That there is capital, folks with money who are looking for places to invest to like increase their money, like the places for that are diminishing, right? Like where we're like all like industry is leaving here, like employed people is becoming less profitable, and it's becoming more profitable as there's growth and like profiting off of pension, security, all these things. It's like a huge place where like capitals are putting their money right now. So like this like connection between like Collections Corporation in America, like passing this law in Arizona in order to make money, like it is really like where like big forces are trying to like find ways to make new money off of like the most horrible things that you can move on. I think that's, I mean, it's scary, but it's like really like what we're facing in this, like as the economic crisis deepens, like what's happening.
So we heard like these comments. We also kind of, when we went around, we heard some of the challenges around the criminal justice system. And like what we know from the numbers that Stephen presented us is essentially in America, there is a nation inside a nation. So it's like we have a population the equivalent of Jamaica, 3 times the size of the population of Iceland, incarcerated or held in some form or manner in the jails, juvenile detention centers, immigration detention centers, and our prisons, private or state-run. So we have this very large population, and so as people who work in communities and who broadcast to communities, we know that there are folks in our audiences, or who are or programmers who are connected to this issue. And so we're going to hear now 3 case studies, 3 examples about 3 different programs and how they are relating to the criminal justice system. And as we listen to these programs, realize that in pretty much every state in America, there is some sort of program, where some group in your community is already trying to figure out how do we address this system. So we're going to hear from Barbara, and she's going to talk about a direct program that works just directly between their Books to Prison program and folks who are on the inside. Then we're going to hear from Stephen, and Stephen is going to describe to us kind of how activists, media activists, community activists are utilizing radio to push forward a particular campaign. And then you'll hear from me on Calls from Home about how we do a weekly radio show dedicated to kind of addressing the criminal justice program where I'm from. So Barbara, we turn it over to you.
Thank you. I'm here in Champaign-Urbana and work with Books to Prisoners downstairs, and any of you that are interested after the workshop in spending a little time in Books to Prisoners, you're welcome to join me downstairs. Books to Prisoners was started 8 years ago by a woman who had a son who was incarcerated in the county jail. And she was a white, middle-class person. Her son was, I think he had drugs he was caught with or something. And she discovered 2 things from her own personal experience. One was that the telephone system in the jail was an enormous ripoff. The only way that a prisoner could call out or be called was through this private telephone system, which was like $1 a minute. And when you call out as a prisoner, your family has to agree to take a collect call, and then the meter starts. And of course, people in jail are poor, so this is a very great hardship. And the second thing she discovered was that when she tried to take her son some of his books from his library at home, they said, no, we don't allow any books or magazines from outside to come inside. Now, if you want your loved one to have a book, you can order it from Amazon so that it comes in a plastic package and it's never been opened, because as they told us later, contraband. People may write notes in books and so forth. That would help you escape or something. So she was very upset about these 2 things, and she proceeded to go to fashion a petition about the phone system. And just as I arrived here 8 years ago, moving from Chicago to here, I got here just in time to sign the petition. And the petition, she got hundreds and hundreds of signatures about the unfairness of this phone system, took it to the county board, which is responsible for the jail, but not very closely, if you know what I mean. They oversee it technically, but they don't really. know what's going on, generally. And so they were kind of ashamed of themselves or embarrassed by this information, and the result was they got a new phone system that wasn't like the old one. Now, coming here from Chicago, I was in shock that anything could be that easy. But that has to do with the size of the town we're in and the fact that it's a college town, it's a university town. So that was my very first experience here. The second thing she did was to found Books to Prisoners. And she did it on the basis of a few letters that someone, some graduate student, we call him our mythic origin founder. We don't even know his name anymore. But he had a dozen or so letters that had come from prisoners in Illinois, from prisons, saying, could you please help me, give me a book, you know, give me this book or that book or whatever. And so they collected these books, she and her friends, and mailed them at their own expense to the prisoners. And that was the beginning of Books to Prisoners. The third thing she did after Books to Prisoners was in operation for a year is she had a discussion with the sheriff, who's still our sheriff, and he agreed to allow Books to Prisoners to install a library where there was nothing. And it's my understanding, you might know better about this, Nick, but I've been told by people who've been incarcerated in Cook County Jail that there is no library there. And of course there's many more people, but it's thousands and thousands. I've heard 22,000 people there. Here we have like 200, you know. But no library and no program really at the time. Not even exercise. And there are just people complain in the jail that they're going to die of boredom. And I've even heard prisoners say they can hardly wait to go off to state prison because there's programs there. There's things to do. They're not so bored if they're going to have to go. I mean, of course, they'd rather get out. But so she got agreement to set up a library. And now we have two libraries, one in the women's jail and one in the men's jail. And we, including Becca over here, go over there every week and play librarian and check out books. And of course, the library's small and we often don't have what they are looking for, and they tell us and we go back and we try to get it and bring it in to them. I had feedback on that just recently from a friend of mine who had a friend who just got out after 3 months in the county jail for a DUI, a 50-year-old white male. And he said, he's on 3 years probation. He was talking about how he would do everything in the world to keep from going back because it was such a horrible experience. He said, I couldn't have gotten through it without the books. I just wouldn't have made it. I lost my mind. So we get that kind of feedback all the time on how important the books are. So now, 8 years later, Books to Prisoners has grown to the point where we have a database that we keep feeding every time we mail books out. We have mailed 73,880 books in these 8 years to 11,900 different inmates. Some of them get several shipments, you know, in the 26 prisons in Illinois. They write to us. How do they hear about us? We have no idea. We have never advertised anything. What we advertise around here is for people to donate books because all our books are donated. And so we do a lot of publicizing our book sales, and we have speeches to groups, and we built up a lot of goodwill over the 8 years of people donating their books to prison. We also realized something in the middle of all this. Books are kind of on their way out in the larger sense, like vinyl records. You know, people are reading online on Kindles and ebooks. So people are more ready to get rid of their libraries than they used to be. And at the same time, one of the most horrible things about prisons in Illinois, I can't speak about any place else, no computers, no access to computers. So imagine yourself just being locked up with no access to the outside world. Now, radio over in our county jails, no. they are not allowed to hear, to turn on the radio. They don't have one to turn on. But there's no radio in the county jail. Nick knows more about the state prisons because he's done radio with regard to the state prisons. But it's a pretty barren landscape. They do have TV, but it's the kind of TV where you got to share it with 10 other people and you get to fight over what program of the 3 available you will be watching. So books assume an enormous importance in that landscape with no computer access. And so we feel like, well, there's one more organization which I was co-founder of called 3Rs. It's 3 years old. It's called, and Becca's in that one too. Reading reduces recidivism. Obviously calculated to get sympathy from a section of the population that isn't here. And the recidivism in Illinois is 51%. Now, from a financial point of view, which is all that most of the politicians care about, that's very expensive to have half of the people that you let out come back. And we say any educational program of any kind that has ever been measured shows a reduction in recidivism for an educational program. And one kind of educational program is called reading, just reading. And they even have this in a couple of places in the world where people are actually sentenced to read books off of a list. And then, that's in Texas. And then in Brazil, you can get 4 days of good time per book. Makes a lot of sense. So, all right.
We get 1 minute.
So it's interesting you talk about books, and I'm going to talk about phones. And I think the thread is just communication. And I think the other thread that I'm hearing as I listen to the brother here talk about the high rates of recidivism, a lot of it has to do with the policies that are in place in a lot of these prisons that reduce the level of communication and contact with the outside world. And prison phones is a big part of that. And I come to this issue from a personal perspective. I have a cousin of mine who's in prison in California. He's going to spend quite some time behind bars. And when I first got involved in this campaign, since he went to prison, I actually hadn't been in communication with him. But I had someone, slip him a note to give me a call, and he gave me a call, and I mean, it was great to connect with him. But I wanted to also make it happen just to figure out, like, if what people were saying or experiences around the high cost of phone calls was actually true, and I found it to be, unfortunately, very true. And I'll explain a little bit more about how that played out for me. But Prison Phone Justice is a campaign that's being led by 3 different organizations. The Media Action Grassroots Network, which is a national network of local-to-local media justice, social justice organizations from across the country, of which some folks who are in this group are members of Magnet. And then that network is managed by my organization, the Center for Media Justice. It's also Working Narratives, which Nick is a part of, who is helping to support a lot of the online organizing as well as on-the-ground organizing. And then Prison Legal News, which supports research around this issue. So the purpose of the campaign for prison phone justice is to reduce the cost of prison phone calls. And it happens to fall on multiple levels. We're talking about the cost of interstate phone calls, so a call from one state to another, as well as calls within the same state or local calls. What we found is that across the board in most states, those rates tend to be dramatically higher than what most of us just tend to pay for having access to a phone. This will just show you, a snapshot of what our website looks like. I'd encourage you guys at the end of this to check it out. It's phonejustice.org. It's a website that has a ton of information, as well as a place for people to get involved and get engaged. So if you haven't connected with phonejustice.org yet, I would highly encourage you to do so. This just kind of breaks down what I'm talking about. So these are phone rates in states that have and don't have regulations that, that lower the cost of phone calls. So on the left-hand side, you'll see states that don't have any laws in the books that regulate these prison phone companies. And when I'm talking about prison phone companies, I'm actually not talking about the phone companies that we're familiar with. It's not the AT&Ts, it's actually not the Verizons. They're companies that are specifically set up just to do this business. It's companies like Securus, Global Tel Link, among the two biggest ones, PNC, MCI. But you can tell on the left-hand side, you'll see that a local call will cost you about $3.50 for a 15-minute phone call. In Georgia, that's much higher, $5. Alabama, $6. In Texas, almost $11 for a 15-minute phone call that's local. On the right-hand side, you see states that have actually taken some steps and measures to address it, and the calls are dramatically lower. What's interesting is a company like Securus, for example, it's a company that's based in Dallas. They provide their services to prisons through what we call voice over internet protocol. Has anybody ever tried to set up a Skype account? Anybody have a Google number? How much did it cost you to get it set up?
Free.
Nothing, yeah. It's a very cheap technology. What this company does is the phone calls that get patched into coming out of the prisons will get redirected to a central server that's located in Dallas, Texas, right? But if that call happens to originate from a place like Alabama, the cost will cost dramatically higher than if that call originated from Rhode Island, even though it's passing through the same piece of technology. And they're completely arbitrary in how the rates are set. My personal experience that I was referring to, I was making an interstate phone call. And the call came in from California into New York, and I had to pay a $4 connection fee just to get the phone call. And then each minute after that was 70 cents a minute. And I highlight this, and I'm glad that I had a chance to connect with my cousin, because New York and California are actually two states that have some regulation in the books at the state level that addresses the high cost of phone calls. However, when you're making an interstate phone call, that doesn't necessarily apply. So we're still paying high rates even in places where, you know, folks have organized at the local level and said we need to lower the cost of calls. So this campaign is really trying to fight things on three fronts. The reason these calls are so high is because in order to actually get a contract with a county or with the state, you know, to provide that phone service, these phone companies have to provide kickbacks back to the state budget or the county budget. Now that cost, who do you think it gets passed on to? Yeah, but it's not necessarily the prisoners, it's the families who are paying for it. So the families end up paying these high costs of kickbacks, and in some states these commission rates, is what they're called, commissions, can be as high as 51%, 70%. Basically 70% of everything that comes in has to go back into the state budget. So they have to make their profit somehow, so they just raise the rates. So we want to end those kickbacks. We also want to lower the fees and lower the rates. And these are two places where we feel like there's a role for, at the national level, for the Federal Communications Commission to play. I mean, they have the power to regulate interstate phone calls. So this campaign right now is currently focusing on the Federal Communications Commission and really pushing them to address this issue. And specifically to set rates for what those interstate phone calls can and can't be. As part of this campaign, the other thing we're trying to do is we're also trying to elevate the voices of those impacted, because a lot of what we talked about earlier is we threw out a bunch of numbers, 2.2 million folks behind bars, 2.7 million children with a parent incarcerated in prison. So what we're really trying to do is elevate voices of those folks who are invisible in this debate right now. And there's a few ways that we've done that. Rather than read out these quotes, I'm going to play you some of the things that some of the ways that we've incorporated those voices and packaged them to you know, out to radio stations. We did a couple actions recently. We did a Mother's Day of action where we were trying to gather 600 stories, about 1,000 stories from folks out there who were dealing with this issue firsthand. And we gathered about 600 online postcards that we
Did anyone here take part of the Mama's Day action?
Yeah.
All right.
We had a couple folks. And we submitted those stories to the FCC. We also produce a Mother's Day radio show. And we took some of the stories that were recorded and packaged them into a radio show, and I'll play a little bit of that. You think this one's better?
I think the other one is.
Hello, welcome to a special.
Hold on, I'll play a different one. I'll play this one here.
Hello, my son is in prison. He has 5 phone numbers that he can call. Those are the only family members who have maintained their jobs through the financial crisis and can accept his calls without worrying about the cost of those each month. He's lost contact with all the rest of his friends and family members. Now that it's time to do a support package to ask for him to be paroled, we only have those 5 family members to ask for support from. The cost of the phone calls has severely limited his chances of gaining parole and using the contacts that he could have had to gain employment when he is released. Thank you for listening. This call is in reference to the price of prison phone calls. Yes, they are very expensive. A prepaid call is $7 for 20 minutes. I understand it's a business, but major phone companies have lowered their prices to have unlimited long distance calls for nominal monthly fee. I'm sure the FCC can make changes in regard to this. Lowering the prices of prison calls will also make for better inmates. Speaking with family, friends, and loved ones on a regular basis will give them the support that they need. Speaking with their children often to establish better relationships. When they have that communication outside with people who let them know they're loved and someone cares about them, it shows in the inmate's actions.
Hi, I am Sue Reynolds. I'm calling this morning about the call of the prison calls to homes. Each time a call is placed in to homes just for the prisoner to have communication with his family, it's $7.25. Families today cannot afford to pay the bill. I feel like this is not a proper way for the family to have to pay for charges that is not necessary when you already have a line at home where you can call out free if you need it. So why can we not call our prisoners? Thank you.
So that's just to give you a little sample. And this, I didn't mean to do that. We are going to close this. So this radio show was packaged together, and I think it was picked up by about 83 radio stations across the country. One, it's a really good way to elevate the voices of these folks who are impacted. I think what you can hear and what's obvious in their stories is that they're very knowledgeable about this issue. It's not like they are just being ripped off. They know exactly what's happening. They know who the players are, and they know who needs to take action. So that's what's been great about the work that we've been doing, is really giving opportunities for those voices to get out. We did the same thing again for Father's Day. We did a national call-in day in partnership with the United Church of Christ to call into the FCC. And before I tell you, well, there were about 550 phone calls that went in that day to the FCC. The FCC generally only averages about 400 phone calls on all the issues that they work on and focus on. So on one issue, we managed to get over 500 calls, into the FCC, which was big. And we also produced another Papa's Day show, which I'm not sure how many radio stations picked it up.
Around 85.
About 85. So one of the things I would throw out here for folks who have radio stations and have connections to that, it would be great if we can identify some additional places where these shows can be produced and sent out to. We have a holiday edition that usually comes out at the end of every year, and so we'll be looking for folks to distribute to.
Yes.
There we go.
Do you
Yeah.
do any posting online, like if there's groups that aren't necessarily radio, but there's online platforms?
Yep. So essentially that's how we've incorporated radio into this campaign. The campaign is ongoing, and so I would encourage folks, if you have access to social networks, we've been trying to populate the FCC's Twitter with messages to encourage them to take action around this issue. We've still got an ongoing group of folks that are calling into the FCC, so if you have a minute, the phone number is up there. when we're done, I'd highly encourage you to make a phone call. So, and the script is up there too. So, yeah.
Can you hit my PowerPoint for me?
Yeah.
All right. So a little mountain music from Eastern Kentucky. You can go through those slides. Mixed in with a little hip hop. We call it hill hop. Yeah, go ahead and go through those first three. Mountain music plus hip hop, yeah, equals hill hop. All right, so that comes out of prisons being moved into the very rural, hit the next slide, the very rural area that I live in the Appalachia coal fields. And if you think about where Virginia, Kentucky, and West Virginia kind of all come together, that's the central Appalachia region. And what happened in my community in the 90s is that as coal mining mechanized, we lost jobs. And so the solution was build prisons. And so this is Wallens Ridge State Prison. It's on top of the highest mountain in Southwest Virginia. They were going to build a high school there. It's built on top of a reclaimed coal mine, so it used to be a mountain that was seared off. Mountaintop removal, yep. And so that's Wallens Ridge State Prison, which was built in 1998. And so it opened, and we started getting letters from prisoners. I was DJing the only hip hop show, Holler to the Hood, in Eastern Kentucky. So if you can imagine a sea of bluegrass music and country music on the air, and then there's one guy who convinced the radio station he was going to do a jazz show. And I would play a little Charles Mingus to scare off all the listeners who I thought wouldn't like the hip hop. And then I would play some hip hop, and then we started to get some letters. So we started getting these letters that described abuse, human rights abuses. And so within our region's prisons. And they were not writing me because they thought I was an activist or that I could do anything about it. They were just like, this is at least one friendly voice that I hear. So this person's playing some music, and the reality is the folks were very far from home. We live in a very rural area. Closest airport 3 hours, closest bus station 3.5 hours, and so if you wanted to get there, it was pretty hard. We have prisoners from the Virgin Islands. We have prisoners from New Mexico. If you're from urban Virginia and you're in this prison, you're 7.5 hours from home with no public transportation in between. So it's very hard. So the first thing I did, because I knew this was, like getting these letters about abuse, I was like, I want to crack it open. I don't want this just to be me talking to folks with some sort of rhetorical statement. I want this to be interactive. So I said, bring forward your best chess player. So I was like, I will play whoever your best chess player, and I'll put some money on the table. Next slide. So, if you've ever played chess through the mail, it can take a while. So about the fourth week, which we were on the fourth move, the prison calls me up. Who gave you permission to do this? Permission? I don't need your permission. We're just, it's like public radio. We don't have to ask permission. And so then they put the prisoner that I was playing, they took away his radio. Well, what did the prisoners do? They yelled the move to him through the ducts. So it was unstoppable. They couldn't stop us. They couldn't stop us from playing our chess game. Big Daddy Duke, he won. He won $15 off of me. He knew he was going to win about the 10th move in, but it took us several months. But what happened is it became a whole event on the air. Like I would get like 100 letters from prisoners making fun of my moves, and it kind of cracked over. Then there was all this, like the thing that they had been telling the prisoners, it was a supermax prison, Red Onion, Wallens Ridge. The thing they would tell them when they got here, you're in the middle of nowhere. We can do anything to you. You have no friends. I mean, this was their rhetoric, right? Well, suddenly, there's a chess game going on with this guy. There's an outside connection. And the correction officers, many of who I know because I play basketball in my own community, so I know these guys, they knew suddenly there's a voice of accountability. Like, this isn't as isolated, like, so this abuse that we're doing, 5-point restraints, leaving people strapped on a table for 5 days, it's getting harder to get away with. And you know, we knew things were bad when prisoners started dying under very suspicious terms. So David Tracy, a 19-year-old kid from Bridgeport, Connecticut, never been in prison, was sentenced to 3 years for a small bag of marijuana that was found next to him. I interviewed the correction officers who knew him in Bridgeport, said he was just kind of a minor guy, had a bad arm, and that he acted out so he'd be put in productive custody. So that makes him the worst of the worst. He gets shipped down to Virginia, where he's put in isolation for 24 hours a day and commits suicide. Through the radio show, we found out, the prisoners all wrote us, hey, this kid just died. You know, it was under suspicious thing. And we started to actually build up a little accountability, so much to the point that a correction officer of conscience sent me the video of his death. You know, and like we were able to actually get that into the court system and win the family a $5 million settlement. So suddenly we're creating some accountability in it. Now, on the radio tip, you know, we had this, you know, I played the chess game, I'm playing music, I'm kind of looking at letters. I was like, let's organize one day that we have kind of like all the families calling. So we call it Calls from Home. It was a very, and we just like, the prisoners wrote a press release for us. They sent letters out, and we just had a couple hours set up. So can you play, I think it's a PSA maybe. This will just give you a sense of how the show works.
The YouTube?
Nope, it's, there it is, calls. No, yeah, that's it. It's our theme music.
Uncle Mike, I love you. I want to wish you a Merry Christmas, and this is Crystal. Merry Christmas. Thank you.
Thousand Kites in this radio station invites you to participate in a special holiday radio program for prisoners, Calls from Home. Send a message of hope and encouragement to those behind bars.
And Teddy Bear, I just want to let you know in this time of the year that I love you and I miss you and I wish I could see you.
Read a short poem, sing a song, or send a blessing. Speak from your heart to the over 2 million people behind bars this holiday season. Your messages will be broadcast on radio stations around the country, sending radio waves of hope to prison walls. Call in your message toll-free at 877-410.
All right, so you get the idea. So the first time we did this, we didn't know how many people would call in. We ended up getting hundreds of calls. And there were people who were calling saying, I never knew where my loved one was incarcerated. I haven't spoken to my father in a decade. And so we started to actually break down some of the disconnect by just kind of doing a very simple radio show like that. And so Calls from Home, we do it weekly. And it is just basically family members calling in every week, kind of giving news. And folks have gotten very comfortable. So they talk about what they cooked for dinner, who scored a touchdown at the football practice. And we don't add much to it. It's just an hour block of family calls. The political consequence of this is it has created built-in accountability. So if something happens in the system, in our prison system, we have 100 callers every week who are kind of chiming in, who are kind of connected, so they can actually start to voice concern. And so I'll give you 2 examples. A woman from the Virgin Islands came up, and she said, you know, I'm here to visit the Virgin Island prisoners. And the warden said, you know what, I don't want to let you have this visit. So she had come all the way. So she told us about it. She came over to the radio station. I was like, well, hold on. So I called the Virginia Department of Corrections. I say, hey, it's Nick from that radio show. I just want to know if this is true. I'm not being confrontational. I just want to know if this is true. It was a message I left. It was actually on the public relations person. 5 minutes later, her phone rings. It's the warden. Well, you know what? I changed my mind, and I've decided we can work this out for you. So we've created, by just like this, having this community online, we have some power. 2 weeks ago, we found out a different prison in Virginia, a women's prison, they hadn't turned on the air conditioning. They were refusing to turn on the air conditioning. So one of our people said, hey, I'm from the radio show. It's not even connected to where they are. But like, you know, we have the numbers to cause trouble. So like, what's up with this AC? 3 hours later, it was reported from a loved one inside that prison, they turned on the air conditioning. So it's like you can build some grassroots power just by having a non-political, like we don't do a lot of political rhetoric. Sometimes kind of leftist, anarchist people want to call up and be like, smash the criminal. We're like, yo, this is about your story. How are you connected? How are you speaking to your loved ones? And understanding that at the same time, we're in an area that these are people who are making their living off of the prison system. We're critical of that, but we're also not just going to call up and call them white racists. Like you have to get down into economic analysis, and you also have to be accountable. So we try to have it really people who are directly impacted in the dynamic and not use like a lot of rhetoric. So we can play the little explainer video that just kind of shows our theory of how the show works.
What I see you doing is helping the prisoners realize that they are human beings too.
That's right.
This is Monica, Martin, and their daughter Sophie. Martin has been incarcerated far from home. Traveling to visit him is difficult, and calling the prison to talk is very expensive. I told Monica about the radio program Calls from Home. It allows families and friends to speak directly to loved ones through the power of community radio. Now, Monica calls into the toll-free number where she had Sophie record a message for her father. We'll take Sophie's message and edit it, creating a radio program offering encouragement and support that we broadcast to those inside our nation's prisons. Over 2.5 million people are inside our prison system. Community radio provides a valuable link to the outside world. Using a simple process, we provide a powerful community service to families affected by incarceration by allowing them to speak to their loved one each week. Calls from Home helps maintain family connections like that of Sophie and her father. Visit our website to learn how you can carry our program or to get involved.
And so any of you are welcome to start your own Calls from Home. It doesn't have to be every week. It could be once a month. It could be once a year. However we want to do it. And we're willing to talk with you about a very simple system we've set up for folks to do this sort of programming. The other thing I want to say is that example is about putting radio going in, but we can also build strategies where folks don't have radios by gathering letters and then performing them. So we've done things where we've taken 100 poems and then we had those poems workshopped into a play, and then that play has been performed around the country, including places like New Mexico, and people reinterpret it. And so radio can also not just send voices in, but it can also help pull voices out and then repurpose them and turn them into a public performance.
So picking up on Barbara's comment earlier about the local jail not having a radio, I mean, I take it that that's not a problem with state prisons and other places. I mean, I'm really surprised in a way, from a control perspective, that they are allowed to have radios.
I think each municipality, each state is different. One thing is that one of our strategy is around aggregation. Is, for example, we talked about the Cook County Jail. We have a nun that works in the Cook County Jail who takes the radio program, burns it to a CD, and plays it as part of her educational programming. And so we have the same relationship with a group in Maine there's a lot of ways that radio, if it can't broadcast in, it can still be carried in, it can still be brought in. And then on the reverse, we can, as radio stations, we can work to figure out what's the story and how can we create some content out of this for as public education.
You've been watching or listening to a presentation recorded at the Grassroots Radio Conference 2012 at the Indie Media Center in Urbana, Champaign. Thanks.